Hello, everyone, and welcome to Artful Impact, episode 7. Today, we have Ronnie Riskalla. He's an award-winning screenwriter, director based in Sydney, Australia, with a passion for filmmaking. He started creating films as a child and later studied film and drama in high school. He's also worked in the cinema industry for over 20 years before transitioning over more into filmmaking. He's established Rising Pictures and acquired distribution rights for Muslim. He co-founded Skycross Entertainment, which will be releasing his second film, Streets of Colour, this year. Currently, he's in development with the Disney Asia Pacific project and working on Australian crime thriller, a true crime series. He's a member of AACTA, the Australian Directors Guild, and the Australian Cinema Pioneers. Oh my gosh, your bio. I'm like,
thank you so much.
Platform. I mean, thank you so much for being a part of this. And we're going to go straight into it. Like, you are about to be, you're on the way to premiering your second feature film, Streets of Colour. Can you tell us a little bit more about this film?
Streets of Colour is a very personal film. It's something that I've been making it's been 7 years actually, believe it or not. I started writing this back in 2016 and didn't think it'll actually take this long. We thought it would take 2 or 3 years as an independent sort of film, but it's very personal. It's about my own experiences growing up in Western Sydney as, you know, a kid of like migrant parents. It's about, at the core, it's about racism, it's about family, it's about friendships. But pretty much how it all came about was when I was a kid, a child back in the 80s and a teenager in the 90s, I suffered at the hands of like a lot of racism, you know, and you know it was pretty brutal, and it was something that I guess I dealt with for a long time. Going into the adult years, you know, you leave it behind. You think racism doesn't really exist anymore, and it wasn't until I had an encounter in my 30s as an adult with a young 15-year-old kid who was shouting these racial slurs at me. And I was shocked. I was like, hey, racism's still happening. Maybe it wasn't all the traumatic experiences that I had as a kid. Maybe I thought, you know, like I was exaggerating it. So, you know, you're a kid, you're an adolescent, you're thinking, you know, things are heightened when you're going through all those hormones and all those sort of things. And maybe I thought going into my adult years, maybe all that stuff was a bit of a time where I thought it was bigger than what it was. But it wasn't until that incident occurred and I went, hey, I've got to put pen to paper. There's something that we still need to discuss about racism here. So Streets of Colour was born out of that. It's basically about Tez. He's a Middle Eastern young guy who's loosely based on myself, who witnesses his best friend being killed in a racist street fight, and he basically has to navigate his journey into trying to make peace with the fact that he was actually blamed for the death of his best friend because he told him to go out that night, and it's a journey of like drug addiction, drug dealing, and a lot of the stuff that I sort of grew up with in Western Sydney. But it also sheds a really good spotlight on the good, the bad, and the ugly of growing up in Western Sydney, and growing up in such a sort of an almost demonized area, and showing that there is hope, and then you can be successful coming out of adversities that, you know, and challenges that you face in growing up in those areas that are almost neglected. Hope that wasn't too long-winded.
So for you, feature filmmaking is huge, right? So I want you to maybe explore what are some of the challenges that you've encountered during the production process, and even some of the ways that as an independent filmmaker you overcame them.
Well, as you probably know yourself, being a filmmaker, funding is number one. Like getting access to funding and government funding or private investing is almost impossible, especially if you don't have a track record, which I don't. Even though this is my second feature film, my first feature film was many years ago. It was an experimental film that was made by a bunch of students. So that really wasn't something that was successful. It was just an experiment to see if we could make a feature film, and we did, and we learned a lot, which was great. I don't regret making it, but going into this, it was just like basically taking money out of my mortgage for my house, getting friends and private investors to support us. That's the biggest challenge. Now, having very limited funds is probably the biggest challenge, because I thought it was going to take 2 or 3 years. It took 6 to 7 years because of the lack of funding and the lack of money, and having to work full time at the same time, making a film part time. So you're doing like 80-hour weeks, and you probably know this as well yourself. So you're working your full-time job, you have your family, you have 3 kids, do you know what I mean? And having to make the film with your spare time. So there's no time for family, there's no time for friends, there's no time for going out and having fun. It's pretty much sacrifice, and that's the biggest challenge of being a filmmaker, is having to put everything on hold, and putting the film first almost in your spare time and getting that done. So I guess that's the biggest challenge of not having a life, really.
Yeah. But for you, what kept you going? Like, that's a long time, like 6 years plus. Like, was there some of the dialogue, or like, because you're the leader, like everyone's going to be watching you and seeing how you go as the years progress, you know? Yeah. So would you say it's passion? Well, what other attributes do you think it would it take?
You got to be enthusiasm. I love everything about film. I live and breathe film every day. I've loved film ever since I was 4 or 5 years old. I used to get my parents' little Betamax tapes, and I put it in, and this is before VHS, right? So this is quite old. And I would record like Star Wars and Superman in the early 80s, you know what I mean? And so when I told my parents I was going to be a filmmaker at like 16 or 17, they weren't shocked. They were like, you've always been obsessed with the screen, like story, books, everything, you know? So there is no backup. I never went to uni to do anything else. I went straight to film school, being 17 years old, finishing school. I made sure I worked for Hoyt Cinemas my whole life. I worked for Deluxe Entertainment, which is a big international American film company. So I never had a backup job. I mean, there's other jobs that I did in between, but when you're surrounded by film all the time, and being a film projectionist and a film, I was a film chief projectionist. So I actually ran the Hoyt Cinema over at Wetherill Park. So I was in charge of that. I mean, I loved it. I mean, just being around it, and I knew one day that I would make a film and it would be projected, you know. So yeah,
it's amazing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. So for you as a director, like, what are some of your creative process or strategies or techniques, and what do you look for when you're on set and you're looking through the monitor? How do you guide your actors, guide the scene? Yeah.
Authenticity, pretty much. I'm looking for truth. So, you know, with casting, for example, if you cast the correct actors in those roles, 80% of your job is already done. You should be able to turn up to set. You've already done your workshopping. Like I do workshopping with my actors. We do rehearsals, and I don't like to over rehearse as well, because out of the workshops, a lot of great things come out, and it's pretty much you get on set, the actors pretty much know what they're doing, and you just pretty much pointing them in the right direction. And I find if you do cast the very best actors, you can sit back in your director's chair and you can look through that monitor, and you know everything's going to go well. You just got to pretty much just make sure the camera crew do the same thing, and if you hire the great DOP and a great crew, you pretty much don't have to do much. You're just pretty much pointing everyone in the right direction. You look in the monitor and say, hey, the lighting doesn't look great. Can we try this? Can we try that? And that's pretty much my process, just making sure we have the very best of everything.
Great. Any particular films, filmmakers, artistic movement that had actually influenced your work in terms of that feature film?
In terms of this specific feature film, probably not. But films that I draw back on, I'll get to directors in a sec, but movies that I sort of draw from are movies like the Australian film Romper Stomper, which is a great gritty film. So, you know, I wanted to make a gritty film like that. So because I felt like I grew up in a very gritty world. I didn't have Russell Crowe in the lead, so, you know, it would have been great. But those sort of films like The Boys, those great Australian films, I draw from them. And films like Boys in the Hood, which growing up was the film for us growing up in Western Sydney. It was like the film we'd watch over and over again. I think I remember getting like a bootleg of that on VHS, and we were just watching it over and over again, you know, and we felt like we grew up in the hood too. So it was a different kind of hood, but it had similarities in terms of the music and the people, the diversity and that sort of thing. So they're sort of like, yeah, John Singleton, love that director. Directors in general, like Martin Scorsese, Sergio Leone, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Films like that are the ones that inspired me the most. Because I'm not just into, obviously, urban films. I'm into, you know, all types of cinema, whether it be dramas or sci-fi or whatever. But there's too many filmmakers and films to name today, that's for sure.
So For your film, like, what are some of the impact that you hope your film will have on its audience? Is there a particular reaction or response that you hope you anticipate?
I guess the first word that comes to mind is giving people hope from Western Sydney. Like, if you grow up in like a low socioeconomic sort of area, I want people to know that it doesn't matter what your challenges and adversities are, that there is hope and there are good people to help you on your way. And that's what the film touches on, that it gives you hope. Whether you're going through drug addiction or abuse or mental illness or whatever it is, you can get through to the end. And that's what Tez in the film, the lead character, goes through. He goes through many adversities, and we cover so many topics. I dare say that maybe I'm overreaching in terms of the topics. We cover spirituality and religion, we cover drugs, mental illness, coping with the loss, of your best friend, death, family, and then the ultimate thing, which you probably could relate to, is cultural identity. Being born in Australia, coming from immigrant parents, you're sort of like, you're an Aussie, but you're not. I know we've had this conversation before. George Basher sort of covered it in his films. Yeah. But it's like, you go overseas and they call you an Aussie, but here they call you a wog or they call you something else. So you never really fit into any box. So the film really explores cultural identity. What's it like to be from a different culture, but you want to assimilate, but you can't quite get there. And I feel like there's a lot of people from immigrant families that are going to really relate to this, especially because the main character, as you probably see in the poster, he changes his hair color, which we all did. We all grew up changing our hair color. We wanted to be blonde. We put the contacts in. We wanted to have blue eyes, and we wanted to just look as closely as possibly to being an Aussie. Do you know what I mean? And I just want people to be able to know that you can embrace your culture, and there is hope. And hoping that this starts a conversation as well about this, and hopefully inspire and educate.
It's amazing. So for you, now this is looking back in terms of your entire filmmaking journey. I mean, what would you find the most rewarding aspect of creating like independent films?
Just being able to create, I think that's it. Just being able to have the opportunity to get on set and make something is the greatest blessing there is. People supporting you, people actually, helping you finance your film and supporting you every day. My wife's been my greatest supporter. She's had to put up with 7 years, or even like 11 years, I think we've been together now, putting up with all my filmmaking, dreams, and trying to get to that next step, you know what I mean? So the reward is always making something that's going to stand the test of time. And I'm just hoping that this film becomes like a cult film, I guess, because that's really why I made it. I didn't make it for myself, even though it was almost therapy making the film. It was something that I had to do to get it out because of that incident that I was referring to earlier about coming into contact with someone that made you feel like, hey, this thing is still happening. It's still prevalent in our society. So if people can just walk away remembering something or being inspired by this film, that is the greatest reward. Not financial, not me being able to become a Hollywood director, which would be great if it happens, but being able to change the world a little bit at a time with your film, I think that's the most important thing.
That's amazing. Can you tell our audience where they can see the film, what the future directions are for the film, it's getting distribution, like all that? Tell us a little bit more about how you can actually see your film. Go.
Sure. The world premiere is happening at the Hayden Orpheum Picture Palace at Cremorne on Monday, the 26th of June at 7 o'clock. So if you want to buy tickets are online now. That's our world premiere. So that's an exciting night. And then we're going to have a limited theatrical release, probably through Western Sydney and some other locations. And then I think we're heading to Melbourne and Brisbane as well. And as we find out more information, we will release what other cities we might be going to.
That's fantastic. Once again, congratulations on finishing your second film. And thank you so much for sharing so much insight, knowledge, and the why you're making films. It's gone beyond you. It's the fact that you want to change how people, perceive the feeling of having particular cultural identities and not having those types of narratives explored on the big screens. I think it's such a fantastic movement that you're doing, and lots of people who watch it, I think there's a part of them that will be touched because it's just hasn't been seen, and when we see it, we can feel like there's a part of us we can heal as well. So thank you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we definitely need more stories like this, right? Like there's a lot of us. I mean, even the Asian community, you know, you don't see stories like this that you can sort of relate to and
Yeah.
you know, and feel like you're a part of.
And I think it's good that it's done from the inside out, because I've seen it where, you know, mainstream, they pick the story up and they do it their version of it, and it never does any justice, because there's not an understanding of the nuances that what actually all the mechanics of why we might do things. And that's a very, you know, you have to experience. It's a lived experience, right? So
that's right. It's very personal. Do you know what I mean? It's you know, it's hard putting up your story up on screen, you know, even though it is loosely based on my own experiences, but it's very hard to put yourself out there and tell a story like this because it is so personal. So I hope that people take the authenticity away from it, of being able to tell a story like this. And I'm just hoping other young filmmakers out of Western Sydney and everywhere else that can tell their own stories, because I'm sure that there's so many other stories to be told.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for having me.